You're watching the Chucktown Wind Report Extended Weekend Outlook for Friday, October the 9th through Monday, October the 12th. Okay, so we've had quite a relaxed pattern as this high pressure has settled down over South Carolina as of this morning. We did see a northeast to east-northeast flow Wednesday and Thursday with a little bit of backdoor sea breezing. It did bring it into the low teens with a couple of mid-teens pulses, and then it backed down very quickly. So we didn't see a whole lot with that, but for right now we're seeing a light northerly flow around the center of this high pressure, and as this drifts off to the east into the Atlantic, we'll start to see a return southerly flow up the coastline as this cold front drops down into the southeast region. So what I'm anticipating here, and I mentioned it in the Chucktown Wind Report group yesterday, is this area of the Atlantic right now along the shelf waters of the coastline, not the Gulf Stream, but just the shelf waters, where the water temperatures have fallen several degrees as a result of our recent storm that dumped 25 plus inches of rain that cooled down the water significantly, coupled with the cooler air that was driving down from the north. So where we were at about 78 to 79 degrees, now we are down into the low 70s, and that usually starts the marine layering events. So marine layering, basically what it does is it decouples winds along the coastline and it keeps them capped to lower speeds. So where you see gusty higher speeds inland, sometimes the coastline, and you can't be fooled by it because you may see trees blowing and you may see a lot of wind in the area, but when you get to the beach you find that there's just not a lot there. You might see 10 to 12 knots tops, and that is symptomatic of what we call marine layering, and it happens about this time every single year. So I'll get to that in just a minute. For right now, we do have this cold front dropping down into the southeast region, slated to press through Saturday night. We could get a low pressure develop over our state as it passes over the Appalachian Mountains and gets a little bit of spin. We could see a westerly flow develop Saturday, and maybe even into Saturday night and early Sunday morning. We could see some of that wraparound spin going on with a northwest flow by the time we wake up Sunday morning. But then this high pressure building in behind it shows a northerly flow building down, and we could get low to mid-teens out of that. It does not look very strong, as this is going to set up more of a ridge instead of a central high pressure that we've normally seen build to the north with strong driving northeasterly winds. I think we're going to see a lobe to the northeast, a smaller lobe over the Appalachians, and then possibly another lobe here where we just set up a giant ridge over the eastern half of the United States, which that means a weaker overall wind pattern. So not looking for much in the way of moderate winds, but we could see a cool blast Sunday afternoon meet mid-teens levels along the open areas, especially in the Charleston Harbor and north tip of Folly Beach. Rain potentials for this. Now we've had a lot of rain. We don't need much to flood around here still, especially with the swollen rivers. We're seeing a lot of upper air moisture driving across the subtropical jet over the southern Baja and into Texas. So as this front drops down and joins it, it may gather some moisture. I do anticipate this boundary to sag down over the Gulf states and then over through South Carolina as time goes on, and then it should press through quickly. So if we do get rain, it will be mostly coming from the Gulf states and the Gulf of Mexico. Thunderstorms we could see, however, with the cooler waters, the cooler shelf waters I just talked about, sometimes that tends to fizzle out thunderstorm activity and even some rain activity as it's a more stable environment. So cooler waters mean more stable environment for thunderstorms and rain. You don't see a lot make it over the ocean. We do see some storms lining up inland, but then they typically will fizzle out. Okay, looking at our water vapor imagery, here is all that moisture in Texas I was talking about, and we can see it here gathering some steam and heading to the northeast. Now as it joins this boundary to the north, we could see some rains, some intense rains build across this area here. However, when we get into South Carolina, we'll have to watch and see what the boundary does to see if we get any extensive rainfall. I think we're looking at an inch or two for now from the forecast models, but that could increase ahead of the front for later today and into tomorrow morning, so we may be looking at a couple to 3 inches. We'll have to wait and see what the profile looks like tomorrow to see if that boundary joins with the Gulf. Okay, so let's take a look at the Datascope FlowVis, and you can see this northerly wind driving in behind the boundary. And here it is, right about here. You can look at this wind model to detect where where this boundary is, and you see the northerly winds driving down behind it. So that's what we can be expecting for Sunday afternoon once the cold front presses through. Okay, first marine layering event that we had in 2013. I managed to record this every single year, and I like to record the date that it happens to find out what the historical significance is over time. So November the 1st is when our first marine layering event happened in 2013. Very similar pattern that we see right here going on, with a cold front moving down through the southeast region and high pressure building in behind it. And that was, we showed our area all the way from South Georgia up to Outer Banks, North Carolina, where the winds never fully mixed to the surface for the coastlines, and we did see significant winds capped around the 10 to 12 knot ranges. The marine layering, I'll show you this right here. Now the marine layering looks sort of like this on the water, where you have a haze going on, and it could be very subtle. It could be thinner than this, but typically when you go out to the beach and you look, you'll see a thin haze over the water, and that is what we call the marine boundary layer. That is the decoupling layer, where you have cooler waters at the surface. These clouds up here are indicative of stabilization. What was thunderstorming inland became more overcast up in the mid-levels of the atmosphere. So this whole environment became very stable as time went on, as a cold front approached, and that is how we start our marine layering events for the southerly winds every year. Last year we saw these events. Let's see, the marine layering started on October the 3rd. So a little bit of a difference there, and we're about there now. We're at October the 9th now, and so we're expecting October the 10th to be the due date for the first marine layering event in Charleston. And you can see here with this cold front approaching on October the 4th, on Saturday, October the 4th, here's the front approaching with thunderstorms, and you can see just north of Savannah, where these cooler shelf waters exist, you can see how these thunderstorms really just taper off. If you watch right here, this area, all these thunderstorms taper off, and the entire frontal boundary fizzles out as it heads towards the coastline. So there it is, those cooler shelf waters stabilizing the atmosphere and fizzling out the cold front. I did an article called Drawing a Line in the Water this past spring, but it does apply to the fall. This picture I took just a couple of days ago, where you can see this cloud bank sitting off the coastline, and that's to be expected, especially when we have a southerly wind regime or very light wind regime. We see this cloud bank develop off the coast, and that's usually out over the Gulf Stream. However, this cloud bank tends to push inland or develop just off of our coastline and then push in over land during the sunset. When the air starts to cool, this fog bank sort of creeps over the coastline. Alright, now here is some of the thicker marine layering that's visible, and this is what happens when you see fogging. Some of the thicker marine layering causes fogging along the beaches, and just on the back side is where it clears out. So what we end up having is, where land is warmer and more unstable, this is what the air looks like behind it. So inland, behind the marine layer from the beaches, we see this clearing where the air is warm and the land is giving off heat, and there's more instability in the air, whereas the fog bank sits over the more stable waters. So we see winds actually pick up, and that's why you can actually see, going down Ben Sawyer Boulevard or some of the beach accesses, you can see the winds really cranking up behind here, behind the front island here, and then as you get to the beach, the winds decouple and you see several knots less. Here's Fort Sumter, and this is the fog bank that lurks just off the coastline. We can see that build. The higher the air temperature gets, the thicker this curtain becomes. And sometimes when we see a 15 to 20 degree air temperature to water temperature difference, that fog bank can get really, really thick. So when we're talking about 70 degree waters and we get a warm air mass that brings 90 degree temperatures, air temperatures into the area, we see this type of setup occur, and especially as those water temperatures keep dropping and the air temperatures, anytime there's warm air masses, the wider the spread, the thicker the fog. Alright, so if we keep going down, this is about how exact it can actually get when we look at our fog bank. So I've managed to capture this from time to time, where we see this line that develops of the fog bank, and it can be very, very distinct. I mean, it's maybe 50 to 100 yards wide where the winds decouple, and you can see here we have 14 knots that is in the harbor, and even inland we see this warm air mass coming across over the harbor waters. The warmer that air is coming from land, the more coupling it's going to be at the surface. Now out here, if you have winds coming in this direction, if it's coming from cool over cool, there's not a lot of coupling going on, and that's why you see 14 knots here and you see 8 knots here. So basically, in short, I'm expecting marine layering to happen. I don't think we're going to see winds past 10 knots today, and as the cold front comes tomorrow, we may see some low teens, but it's going to be jumpy and up and down, and then we may see some 10 to 14 knot winds. Like I said, ups and downs, and then as we get into Sunday, we'll see a northerly wind build to low teens. So here we are locally in the Charleston area for Datascope. We're seeing these light northerly winds right now. We're about 4 knots in the harbor, 4 knots to the beaches, so very light. I think we should anticipate seeing some below 10 knots today. Here are the models. I'll go ahead and take a quick peek at the model suite that we have. And once again, this is for Isle of Palms. Here's our model suite for today. None of the models are in agreement to go over 10 knots, so I'm going to stick along with that. The higher resolution models keep it more of a southeast flow through evening, so we could see a southeast flow. However, if the high pressure eases out to the Atlantic a little bit further, we could see a south or south-southwest flow develop. Once again, not above 10 knots. Elsewhere in the Atlantic, tropical activity is down. We're not seeing very much, maybe a couple of little waves, one over Puerto Rico, and then we have another wave way out here towards the Cape Verde Islands, but not much is expected. No areas of interest right now, and we should stay fairly quiet. In the next couple of weeks, we may have to start watching this area in the Gulf, the Caribbean, and the Western Gulf over the Bay of Campeche, as those areas could become active. Like I said, in the next couple of weeks, nothing to worry about right now. We'll just keep an eye on it. And that will do it for the Chucktown Wind Report. Thanks for watching.